Hi, this is Peter Friedrich with Organization for Minorities of India, and today I'm speaking with Professor Jaimine Vaishnav, who is a professor from Mumbai, Maharashtra, India, and he's going to be talking with us a little bit about the situation of liberty in India, whether or not Indians have it, and where they should be looking for it. And Jaimine, can you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are? You're a professor in Mumbai.
Hello, I am Jamin and I am a professor in Mumbai. I am teaching economic sociology and subjects related to media for the past 3-4 years. And I'm looking forward to also associated with think tank organizations.
Okay, okay. So now you particularly specialize in economics, in sociology, and you have a keen interest in issues related to liberty. And
Yeah.
what was it that sparked this interest that you have in liberty? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
The interest in liberty starts with self-actualization of rational thinking, unless and until the fish does not awaken itself against the flow. It is a dead fish. I was once upon a time a dead fish. Literature related to liberty, which is easily accessible on mises.org and other capitalism institute actually helped me a lot. And basically, self-learning helped me a lot to realize myself. And even today, in my teachings, I propagate the teachings of liberty.
Okay. Now you had an interesting quote that I saw the other day in a conversation about caste, specifically about a lecture that Arundhati Roy was giving about caste. You wrote, and I'm going to quote here: "Deficiency in the definition on property rights is the root cause of all caste conflicts in India." Can you elaborate on that? Why would you say that there's such a correlation between caste and lack of property rights?
Yeah, I remember that it was my quote on one of your posts, and the quote is quite abstractive in nature. I will like to reason you out of that. Well, to be very frank, it was in 1970s under Indira Gandhi that she's the one who deleted right to property as a fundamental right during her socialism fantasy.
Yes.
Now, if you look at the society scenario in India, we do have a caste problem. In fact, it has racist country than America and Australia, to be very frank. Like in India, we first learn about caste, then about alphabets and numbers, to be very frank. There is a lack of culture when it comes to defining property rights. And Indians fear to even talk about property rights. Even if you look at prime time discussions, there are no discussions on property rights. Even property rights, the definition, there is a lot of information asymmetry on property rights. Considering the culture of India, since it is inured with casteism issues, I believe that property rights are not human unless and until they are individuated in our society. If you look at the caste problems in India, there is a lot of social deficit between all the castes. That is because there is lack of property rights. Now, what I do mean by deficiency in property rights, as soon as the society is blessed with property rights, individual rights follow. And you follow with individual rights, other libertarian rights like right to separate, right to associate follows. So, in order to solve a caste problem in India, I would give a libertarian analysis in the context of introducing property rights. So every caste would be free enough to associate voluntarily among themselves. Otherwise, in the current scenario, under the name of common goodness and in the name of socialism, the minorities are forced to associate with majorities. That is the reason there is a lot of caste conflicts and there is going to be a lot of social issues in India. If you look at the caste problems, if minorities are individuated with individual rights, there would be, you say, a flow of separationism, and ultimately the caste conflicts can be solved. Till then, I think the minorities in India are going to face huge social conflicts under the tyranny of majoritarians.
So then you think that there is not freedom of association available to the common Indian?
The freedom of association is very much constitutionally restricted. There is illusion related to freedom rather than we are having freedom. To be very frank, Peter, we have equality of opportunity rather than freedom of opportunity. So, in order to have freedom of opportunity to be transcended in our society, I would suggest amendment in our constitution and limiting the power of the government.
I see. So now let's lay a little bit of a groundwork here. Since we're talking about freedom, we're talking about liberty. We've already established that freedom of association is very necessary, especially necessary to dealing with these caste conflicts. Now, what would you say are the indispensable liberties? We have, of course, freedom of thought, religion, speech. How would you elaborate on this?
To be very frank, liberty is indispensable in nature. The freedom is inherent with liberty. Considering the ground reality in India, there are only few think tank organizations which are working on the ground to make people aware about libertarianism movement. Even if you check the history of liberalism in India, it was around 1950s and 60s. The libertarianism was only around less than 5% of the social knowledge.
Okay.
Now, coming to your question, which is very direct and straight. Coming to the association, coming to the freedom of thought, freedom of religion, we do have freedom, but the question is, are we really enjoying freedom in an unconditional manner, as long as we are not harming anyone's property? We do have freedom, it is guaranteed under fundamental rights, but considering the emergence case, it's very doubtful that our fundamental rights are really associated with humans. The fundamental rights are completely on the books of the government, so it makes us to doubt again and again whether we are really having liberty on the ground. Do we have freedom of thought? We do have a freedom of thought, but we also should have freedom to get offended. I mean, you're easily offended now and then. You have politicization of thought. You have politicization of conversion.
You say this freedom to be offended. There's a lot of talk about the need to protect the sentiments of people, not to offend sentiments. Do you think how do you perceive that argument in light of free society about protecting people's sentiments?
Once the property rights are defined, we would have private societies, private communities. So ultimately, the private law will determine the right to be offended, right to be spoken, right to be thought. But in the current scenario, freedom of thought or freedom of offense is, as long as you are agreeing with me, there is freedom of thinking. The moment you disagree, there is a lot of seditious laws and defamation laws and followed. And to be very frank, the caste, the casteist people, especially, they are using this kind of draconian laws against the minorities just because they are in the majority area. So ultimately, it becomes difficult to redefine property rights. That was my basic argument in the first scenario. Coming to the second scenario, I think private laws can solve the right to be offended issue. Coming to the really sociological background, I would say let ideas challenge the ideas. Let us not use guns against the ideas. Like many people feel that their ideas are better than the other ideas. Let ideas challenge the ideas. I think this kind of mentality should be embedded in the Indian society. I think that is the need of the hour.
Yes, and it's been said that how do you fight an idea? You only fight an idea with another idea. If you fight ideas with force, you actually increase the power of those ideas. You don't undermine them. You cause people to be drawn to them. So then, freedom of thought, freedom of association, religion. What other liberties would you consider to be indispensable? You mentioned basically that liberties should be unrestricted, unconditional was the word you used, as long as you are not hurting anybody else.
I would say we have to annihilate or delete the social contract theorem, which is embedded with the Indian Constitution, and let the vacuum be replaced with non-aggression principle. I think more Indians should be reading about non-aggression principle rather than spending time with the lengthiest constitution in the world, which is completely utterless and it's just crap, to be very frank. Now.
No, what, can you? Those are very strong words. Those are very strong words.
Your voice is correcting, Peter.
Those are strong words, Jaimine. So
Yeah, they are very quite strong words, controversial too. But to be very
can
frank,
you
I don't
explain
think
what
I have
is
signed. Pardon?
can you explain what is this non-aggression principle?
Non-aggression principle is a kind of an axiom embedded with the principles of liberty, which believes that aggression against any other living being or any other human being is completely antithetical to the principles of liberty. So, non-aggression principle basically justifies self-defense, and it serves as a basic law in order to practice liberty. And I think this kind of principle can help India to develop economic freedom, to develop social freedom as well as cultural freedom. Now, if you talk about freedom of same-sex marriages, I think in India, same-sex marriage is still illegal. Even marital rape is legal. So I think you can conclude and calculate that in what way our freedom is heading towards.
So you would say at the moment that Indian law does not necessarily prevent aggression.
Yeah, I believe that non-aggression principle should be propagated. If you take my economic classes, I always teach opposite of what is being told in the textbooks because I'm just done with Paul Krugman and John Maynard Keynes. It's time to teach students what does non-aggression principle does. I've been accused of brainwashing students, but I take that as a compliment.
And now, you say you've been accused of brainwashing students, but you would actually you would posit that what you're trying to do is encourage independent thinking. Now, moving on, is there independent thinking present, predominating in India at the moment? What is the ground reality, the ground situation in India? Do you view the society as being one where liberty is appreciated, where you've mentioned the tyranny of the majority? Do you believe that the tyranny of the majority is very commonly practiced in India? And if so, in what ways?
We practice restricted liberty. We practice the majority's definition of liberty, which I think is not liberty at all, which I think is a compromise, which I think is a social adjustment at gunpoint. To brief you about libertarianism movement in India, it was Dr. B.R. Shenoy who challenged Jawaharlal Nehru on limiting his socialism, followed by Swatantra Party, which was led by C. Raja Gopalachari, also known as Rajaji. He is the one who even fought elections against Indian National Congress in 1960s to embedded the principles of limited government. And after his demise, his Swatantra Party came into an end, which was later on carried out by, you can say, Jago Party, Lok Satta Party. There are only less than 8 political parties who are interested to spread economic freedom, the message of liberty. And most of the parties are associated with political populism, socialism, and casteism. In other words, vote bank politics. By this calculation, you can understand that many people do not understand what liberty is. Try to speak with them, they are going to ask you who will build the roads. Who will build the roads? They are still stuck at who will build the roads. You have a recent movie called Manji, where a farmer builds a road after 22 years breaking the mountain. I think Darshak Manji will build the roads.
Yes,
If
yes.
Indian audience is not confident about government building the roads. And I think in fact, I've written an article on that, like Manji as a libertarian, Manji as an anarchist. I think this kind of illustration can help the Indian audience to think, and I think Indian audience feels more and thinks less. I think this is the biggest problem.
They feel more, they think less. That's a very interesting way to put it. Now, in this thinking less, would you say that freedom of speech is encouraged in India? Do Indians have the freedom to write whatever they want and publish it, to say whatever they want and speak it freely in the public sphere? What happens to an Indian if they do that, especially if they say something that's controversial, or as we know, freedom of speech is only really freedom of speech if it protects things that might offend even you and me. So would you say that that's protected in India?
Coming to your point, Peter, if you look at the Indian society, I think kissing in public is still not an act of public decency. You cannot kiss openly in public. You can piss openly in public, but you cannot kiss openly in public. Like few months back, there was a movement in South India, in a state of Kerala, where couples were protesting against the government by kissing openly in public. And to be very frank, the couples were arrested by the government. So freedom of thought, freedom of expression is very restricted and limited. I agree that Constitution tries to protect your freedom of speech and thought, but the question is, have the Indians signed a social contract with the Indian Constitution? Now, coming to the freedom of expression, especially in context of journalism, let me tell you, there are a lot of acts which were established by the colonial British. The acts like Vernacular Press Act, Official Secrets Act, which were made by British to control the freedom fighters, are still in application in the current scenario, despite India winning independence.
That's
So
amazing.
I would say, yeah, pardon?
That's amazing. Despite India having independence, you say that these colonial era laws are still in effect. That's actually rather confusing and mind-boggling. That why would independent India want to preserve colonial era laws?
The theme of the laws remains the same, only there are few amendments. And I think few amendments are not in sync with the reality. I think most of the legislators suffer from schizophrenia. I would say that. To be very frank, acts like Vernacular Press Act, Negotiable Instruments Act, and many other acts are still used by the government to control the press freedom. And there is a lot of crony capitalism associated with journalism sector. So freedom of expression, at the end, we should be asking freedom of expression of whom? At the cost of whose? So I would say there is a need to demolish all these laws, and I think let people inherently be blessed with natural rights. So I think there would be a reformation in the society. It should come from down rather than from the top.
Yes, from bottom up, absolutely. In fact, one would even suggest that that's the problem at present in not just in India, but in many other places in the world where there is perhaps a lack of liberty, is that people attempt to address it from the top down by seizing power rather than from the bottom up by seeking to diminish power. So that would then take me to my next question, which is, to what extent is the power of the Indian government limited? Is there a limit on it?
Well, on papers there is a limit, but in practice, I don't think people who are affected with pathological power are going to control their parasitical behavior. If you take the example of emergency, which India enjoyed for the 2 years, our civil rights were not guaranteed for the 2 years. So that actually makes me skeptic to question the Indian Constitution as well as the limitations imposed by the Constitution on the Indian government. The Indian government, I mean the constitutional provisions related to limiting the Indian government, the Indian power is defined in the Indian Constitution, but the question is how far do they practice all the amendments, all the provisions from the lengthiest constitution in the world. Though it is written, Supreme Court does guarantee the practical execution of our fundamental rights, but I think the government which is least governed is the best.
Well, I would agree with you on that, and I believe that that's actually a quote or a paraphrase of Thomas Jefferson, that the government which governs least is the best, if I'm not incorrect. Now, the U.S. Constitution is the shortest constitution in the world, and you've mentioned that the Indian Constitution is the longest. The U.S. Constitution is famous for containing the Bill of Rights, which are a introductory 10 amendments which provide basic liberties to the people, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to bear arms, and so forth. Freedom to be free from unwarranted search and seizure. Does the Indian Constitution have something similar? Or if it does it have the same power to it, the same impact?
The Indian Constitution is a cocktail of various other constitutions like the British Constitution, US Bill of Rights, Irish Constitution, and Japanese Constitution, Australian Constitution. I think Indian Constitution is a combination of all this. Like in the context of Bill of Rights of US, fundamental rights are guaranteed by the US. We do not have any as such bill, but to be very frank, the preamble to the Indian Constitution guarantees all the rights. The structure of the Indian Constitution is well defined. I would I would suggest that we need to limit down on the constitutional economic scenario and let the people be empowered with their own private law structure to define the society in a very governed way. I think the Swarajya movement, which talks about direct democracy, there is, like in Hinduism, there is a Vedic anarchism concept which talks about decentralization, Jandapath system in Sanskrit. I think, I mean, when America was not well civilized, India had its own civilization, though it is a controversial form of civilization. But to be very frank, we had some form of anarchic laws, anarchic way of governing our society. I think it's today completely hijacked. And I think we need to revisit our history and question the history from a rational point of view.
Now, you mentioned these private laws. By private laws, you mean then laws in which all parties have actually specifically consented to abide by them, versus this view of a social contract in which nobody can produce the contract, nobody has ever signed the contract, and yet people are still bound by it. Is that correct?
Yes, true.
Okay.
Private laws is well governed by the individual consent, and it guarantees the protection of individual rights. But in social contract, it's to be very frank, it's an illusion. It's an illusion of choice.
An illusion of choice. It's very interesting. So now, many of these laws which may limit choice, and which have been protested, in fact are currently being protested in some areas of India, include laws like the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the AFSPA. That has been protested since year 2000 by Irom Sharmila of Manipur, who's been on a hunger strike the entire time. And other laws, some of them are lapsed now, include POTA, TADA. Many of these laws, it's said that they give immunity, that they give total impunity to security forces in India to do anything that they wish. So then my question is, does the Indian Constitution really place any limits on the forms of laws that the Indian government can pass, or on the type of power that the Indian government can grant itself with these laws, such as the impunity from any prosecution?
Yeah, the Indian Constitution does guarantee some form of scientific temper in limiting such kind of legislating processes, but ultimately the politicization of the legislators have in fact misused the laws rather than use the laws. What you hear about Irom Sharmila and other anti-terrorist activities are, to be very factual, but let me tell you, as long as the property rights are not defined, there could be another Irom Sharmila after 1 decade or 2 decades. So I think what her path is actually right. And even if you look at AFSPA, Armed Forces Special Powers Act, it has been also misused in the Red Corridor, which is infected with Naxalites. It is widely misused by the people who are already in power. So it does give them some form of special powers or immunity, which is unchecked. And it's very difficult to trust their own investigation when it comes to the aftermath scenario of this kind of activities. Rather than looking at the effects of these laws, I would suggest that we better have discussions on the causes of these laws, of the causes of this kind of conflicts. So
Yes,
ultimately,
absolutely.
we will apply deductive reasoning. Yeah, we would apply deductive reasoning and come to the fact that why this kind of scenario jumps to the event. I think there needs a lot of cognitive reason to solve this kind of conflicts. You cannot expect legislators tomorrow to limit down AFSPA because it gives them some special power to control certain communities, and it has been misused by the legislators to catalyze the vote bank politics, and most of the minorities are easy targets of this kind of laws. And I think fact speaks better than these laws provisions.
So here we would be creating a situation where we would be asking people with power to voluntarily give up that power, asking the legislators to remove from themselves the power of AFSPA or similar laws. And that's never going to happen.
That's true. That's never going to happen because the parasites are too embedded with the pathology of corruption and power. We can bring revolution against the government by making people to think about these laws, by making them to question about these laws. I think they are very much alcoholic about the effects of these laws, which I think is in a very terrible condition. The minorities are paying the huge price. I mean, it's completely also violating Articles 29 and 30 of Indian Constitution, which guarantees the minorities to associate among themselves. And this kind of laws become easy targets for the policemen, for the legal legislators to control the minorities. I think it's time for us to have a constructive dialogue and fulfill the gap. And I think there needs to be a political setup to solve this kind of scenario. I think it's a very terrible issue, and I think it's a very deep issue. And I don't see it coming into on the tables to discuss in the next few years. I think it will take time because people do not understand the impact of this kind of laws because they have exchanged their liberty for security.
Yes, yes. And those who would give up liberty for security will never have either one, as it's been said by greater minds in the past. So
Benjamin.
Yeah. Yes, Benjamin Franklin. So then, the AFSPA, as you said, we need to examine the root causes of these issues. We need to be more understanding about how these things originate. And the AFSPA, if I'm not mistaken, is actually based very directly, again, on another colonial era law, which was similarly used to suppress the freedom movement in colonial India before they got independence. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Before independence, we had colonialists ruling the India, and now we have colonialists ruling the India, but with a brown taste. I mean, it's. I completely agree with you at that point. I believe these laws are very regressive and oppressive in nature. They are basically meant to be impressive for the political circles. And this kind of laws actually do not solve terrorism. They give more problem to terrorism. I think
Yes.
terrorists here are freedom fighters. I mean, they are not terrorists. The real government, I mean, the government is a real terrorist. They expropriate, they intimidate, they use violence and fear. So I think that was the Oxford Dictionary on terrorism. I think that would be audible enough for you to know it.
Okay, well then I think as we start to wrap up our conversation here, that's an interesting point that you raise. You say that the government is itself a terrorist. There's this term that's been used, state-sponsored terrorism. Now, there have been a lot of these incidents in India that the state has been accused of involvement in orchestrating massacres. Can you tell us a little bit about these? I think there have been a couple of them in the past 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. State-sponsored terrorism is the legal version of terrorism, where all the activities done by the government, which are truly immoral, are considered moral by the society. 1984 anti-Sikh riots was a state-sponsored terrorism. 2002 Godhra riots was a state-sponsored terrorism. Around 2007, the Chhattisgarh government, which is ruled by BP, they came out with a movement called Sarva Zulum to fight Naxals. So people who are anti-Naxals had to join Sarva Zulum to prove their worth that they are against Naxalites, and they were basically trained and armed. So this is a complete clear-cut example of state-sponsored terrorism. Other than the government involved in state-sponsored terrorism, even research and analysis being raw, intelligence bureau, they have created Al Zulfikar in Balochistan to fight Pakistan. I think state-sponsored terrorism, India has also crossed its own borders, and I think this is a fact which has to be discussed time.
Well, that's very interesting, and that would be something perhaps to discuss at a later date. I think we may have a topic in mind. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion, Professor. I really appreciate your time. I'm hoping that this will open up people's minds to examine this issue of liberty more, and especially consider whether or not liberty is actually protected in India and how to go about protecting it. As you have mentioned, this non-aggression principle is key. That the idea that people should not be committing aggression against each other, and that that should be the purpose of law, is to prevent that. So, do you have any final thoughts for our viewers?
Thank you, Peter, for this opportunity. And I think this was our first Skype discussion, and I really enjoyed a lot. And I'm looking forward to have such kind of discussions with you and your organization, that is Organization for Minorities of India. And I'm very fond of your organization. Most of my students are reading articles at your organization, and your organization is really working in the right step by introducing the concept called liberty in the minds of the minorities. I think this is the right direction in a very wrong country, and let's hope for the best. And I'm looking forward for all such kind of discussions. It was really nice talking to you.
Yes, you as well, and we will stay hopeful.